For decades, the final will of the Queen Mother remained sealed, locked away behind layers of royal protocol and silent agreements that no one dared question. But when the document was finally opened in a private palace meeting, the room reportedly fell silent because the will did not simply distribute wealth or estates. Instead, it reordered the royal hierarchy itself, placing Sophie first and Charles shockingly last. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, the existence of the Queen Mother's sealed will lingered in royal whispers like an unsolved riddle tucked away within the palace archives. Courtiers knew it existed. Lawyers had confirmed it had been prepared long before her passing. But its contents were guarded with such intense secrecy that even some senior members of the royal household had no idea what it contained. That secrecy alone sparked speculation. In royal history, wills were rarely mysterious affairs. They distributed estates, heirlooms, and charitable donations. Yet something about this one felt different from the beginning. Staff who had worked closely with the Queen Mother often hinted that the document carried a deeper message. They spoke carefully, choosing their words with caution, but the implication was always the same. This was not merely about money or property. This was about legacy, judgment, and the future of the monarchy itself. When the day finally arrived for the document to be read, the gathering was small, deliberate, and tightly controlled. Senior royals were invited into a private palace chamber where a legal advisor prepared to deliver the contents that had remained hidden for so many years. The atmosphere inside the room was reportedly calm at first, almost ceremonial. After all, many assumed the will would simply reaffirm the traditional order everyone already understood. But that sense of certainty did not last long. The moment the document began unfolding, subtle shifts in expression started appearing around the table. The language was precise, deliberate, and surprisingly personal. And almost immediately, something became clear. This was not written as a routine royal instruction. It was written as a statement. Then came the moment that changed everything. As the legal advisor continued reading, a name appeared earlier than anyone expected. Sophie, not mentioned quietly in the middle of the document, not acknowledged in passing, but placed first before every other senior royal. The reaction inside the room was subtle but unmistakable. Several attendees reportedly exchanged quick, stunned glances, trying to determine whether they had heard correctly. The wording left little room for doubt. The Queen Mother had intentionally placed Sophie at the very top of her personal legacy. And while that revelation alone would have been enough to shock the gathering, the document had not yet reached its most unsettling detail. Because as the reading continued, the order of names slowly revealed an even deeper twist. One by one, members of the royal family appeared throughout the will. And then finally, near the end of the document, came a placement that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Charles, positioned last. The effect was immediate. Though no one openly reacted, royal protocol demanded composure, but insiders later suggested the silence in that room carried a weight no one had anticipated. Charles reportedly remained still, his expression carefully controlled as the document continued unfolding. Yet those present sensed the significance instantly. Being listed last in the Queen Mother's will was not simply a matter of inheritance. It felt symbolic, almost deliberate, almost like a quiet verdict delivered from beyond the grave. By the time the legal advisor finished reading the final clauses, the room had become heavy with unanswered questions. Why had the Queen Mother structured the will this way? Why elevate Sophie above everyone else? And what exactly had she intended to communicate with a decision so bold, so unexpected, and so impossible to ignore? Within hours, whispers began circulating quietly through palace corridors. Staff members who had long served the Queen Mother started recalling moments from her later years, small comments, thoughtful observations, private conversations that suddenly seemed far more meaningful than anyone realized at the time. Some began to suggest that the will had not been written impulsively. Instead, it may have been the result of years of careful reflection. The Queen Mother had watched the royal family evolve through triumphs, scandals, tensions, and shifting public expectations. Perhaps, in those final years, she had begun forming a very clear opinion about who truly represented the values she believed the monarchy should protect. And if that was true, then the will was not simply an inheritance document. It was a message, a final judgment written with precision and purpose. But to understand why this will carried such explosive consequences, one must first revisit the Queen Mother's final years, when quiet observations and private doubts began shaping a decision that would eventually shake the entire royal household. Long before the will was written, the Queen Mother had already begun watching closely. Palace staff later claimed she possessed an uncanny instinct for reading the emotional undercurrents inside the royal family. Behind her warm public smile, she was quietly studying loyalty, character, and resilience. And as years passed, one royal in particular continued to rise in her estimation, while another, expected to inherit her trust, slowly fell out of favor. Those who served around the Queen Mother often described her as a woman who listened far more than she spoke. She had lived through wars, abdications, scandals, and the heavy weight of monarchy during its most fragile moments. Decades inside the royal institution had sharpened her instincts. She understood that the real story of any royal household was never written in public speeches or official portraits. It was written in quiet gestures, private conversations, and the choices people made when no one else was watching. By the time she entered the final chapter of her life, that instinct had only grown stronger. She was no longer simply observing the monarchy from a ceremonial distance. She was studying it carefully, almost like a guardian measuring the strength of those who would carry its legacy forward. Among the many members of the royal family who passed through her orbit during those years, one figure began leaving an unexpectedly strong impression: Sophie. At first, the connection seemed simple and almost ordinary. Sophie approached the Queen Mother with patience, humility, and a kind of calm presence that rarely demanded attention. She did not seek to dominate conversations or assert herself within the complex hierarchy of palace life. Instead, she listened. Palace staff later recalled moments when Sophie would spend long stretches of time quietly engaging with the Queen Mother, allowing the older royal to reminisce about history, duty, and the burdens that came with wearing the crown's shadow. Those conversations were rarely public, rarely noticed by outsiders, but within the palace walls, they became quietly significant. The Queen Mother valued people who understood the importance of patience, restraint, and loyalty without needing recognition. In Sophie, she began to see those qualities reflected again and again. At the same time, subtle contrasts began forming in the Queen Mother's mind. Charles, long expected to inherit not only the throne, but also the deep trust of the older generation, seemed increasingly absorbed in his own broader vision for the monarchy. His interests were ambitious, intellectual, and often focused on shaping the institution for the future. Yet from the Queen Mother's perspective, ambition could sometimes appear dangerously close to distance. Staff members later hinted that there were moments when she quietly questioned whether the future king fully understood the delicate balance between leadership and service. It was not that she doubted his intelligence or dedication. Rather, she worried that the monarchy required something more subtle, something less about commanding attention and more about quietly earning it. Those concerns reportedly deepened during her later years. The Queen Mother had spent a lifetime defending the stability of the crown, especially during periods when public faith in the royal family wavered. Now, as she watched the next generation navigate its own challenges, she became increasingly reflective about what truly sustained the monarchy across generations. Character began to matter more to her than rank. Loyalty began to outweigh ambition. And in private notes that palace insiders later whispered about, she allegedly wrote thoughts that hinted at a quiet but powerful conclusion: that the monarchy's survival would depend not on titles, but on the people willing to carry its values without seeking personal glory. Within that growing realization, Sophie's presence continued to stand out. Her restraint, her discretion, and her steady loyalty seemed to embody the very qualities the Queen Mother believed the institution needed most. And while few people at the time realized it, those quiet observations were slowly shaping a decision that would one day ripple through the royal family with astonishing force. And while most assumed royal succession rules were untouchable, the Queen Mother was quietly preparing a document that would test those very assumptions. Few inside the palace knew that the Queen Mother had begun rewriting her will multiple times during her final years. Trusted legal advisors were summoned discreetly, and drafts were reportedly reviewed behind closed doors. But the most shocking element was not the secrecy, it was the intention, because buried inside those revisions was a restructuring that would elevate Sophie to the top of her personal legacy and leave Charles standing last. The deeper palace insiders later reflected on those final years, the clearer it became that the Queen Mother had not arrived at her decision overnight. This was not an impulsive gesture or an emotional reaction written in a moment of frustration. It was something far more deliberate, something carefully constructed over time. Quietly, patiently, almost invisibly, she had begun reshaping the document that would become one of the most controversial pieces of royal paperwork ever written. The process started subtly. A request for legal consultation here, a small amendment there. At first, even the lawyers believed they were dealing with routine adjustments. Wealthy figures often updated their wills as circumstances changed. But soon it became clear that the Queen Mother's revisions were not routine at all. Each new draft seemed to refine the same central idea with sharper precision. Those meetings were reportedly held in strict confidence. Only a very small circle of trusted advisors were allowed to attend. Phones were left outside the room. Notes were carefully controlled. The Queen Mother, despite her advanced age, remained fully engaged in every detail of the process. Lawyers who participated in those sessions later described her as unusually focused, almost determined to ensure every word carried the exact meaning she intended. This was not simply about distributing possessions or estates. She was crafting something far more symbolic, a final statement about character, loyalty, and the values she believed the monarchy must protect. And with each revision, that statement grew bolder. At the center of those revisions was a name that continued rising higher within the document. Sophie, not inserted casually, not mentioned as a minor beneficiary, but placed with increasing prominence every time the will was rewritten. Legal experts reviewing the drafts reportedly noticed how carefully the Queen Mother shaped the language around her. The words were deliberate, emphasizing qualities that had clearly impressed the elderly royal over the years: discretion, humility, quiet service, and unwavering loyalty. These were not empty compliments. They read almost like a formal endorsement. And with each new revision, the structure of the will made the message impossible to ignore. Sophie would stand first in the Queen Mother's personal legacy. At the same time, another name slowly moved in the opposite direction within the document: Charles. The shift did not happen dramatically in a single edit. Instead, it unfolded gradually across multiple drafts, almost as though the Queen Mother had taken great care to ensure the final order reflected her evolving thoughts with absolute clarity. Advisors involved in the process reportedly noticed the change and quietly raised concerns. Reordering members of the royal family within such a document was not a trivial matter. It carried symbolic consequences that could echo throughout the monarchy. Some even warned that if the will ever became public, it might ignite controversy that would be impossible to contain. But the Queen Mother remained unwavering. According to those familiar with the meetings, she listened carefully to the warnings and then calmly insisted the wording remain exactly as she had written it. Her decision was not open for negotiation. The structure of the document reflected her judgment, and she showed no sign of reconsidering it. In fact, she reportedly reviewed the final version multiple times to ensure nothing could be misinterpreted or legally challenged. Every sentence was tightened, every phrase clarified. By the time the final draft was sealed, the message embedded within the will had become unmistakably clear. The Queen Mother had made her final evaluation of the royal family's character, and she wanted that evaluation preserved exactly as she had written it. What no one present during those quiet drafting sessions could fully predict, however, was the magnitude of the reaction that decision would trigger once the document finally emerged from secrecy. Because while the lawyers had witnessed the Queen Mother's determination firsthand, they had not yet seen how the royal family itself would respond when those carefully chosen words were finally spoken aloud. But even the lawyers involved could not fully anticipate the moment the will would finally be read and the reaction it would trigger among the royals themselves. When the Queen Mother's will was finally read inside the palace, Those present expected a respectful ceremony. Instead, what unfolded felt more like a moment of royal reckoning. As the legal advisor moved through the document, the hierarchy everyone had assumed suddenly collapsed. Sophie's name appeared first, accompanied by language that elevated her role in a way no one had predicted. The gathering itself had been arranged with the usual precision that surrounds royal matters. Invitations were limited. A tete and dance was tightly controlled. Only senior members of the royal household and a small group of trusted advisors were present when the sealed document was finally brought forward. For most of them, the moment carried an air of solemn tradition. Reading the will of such a central royal figure was expected to be formal, respectful, and perhaps even sentimental. No one entered the room anticipating that the document would quietly challenge the order they had lived under for decades. At first, the atmosphere was calm, almost routine. The legal advisor began with the standard formalities, explaining the authenticity of the document and confirming that the Queen Mother's instructions would now be read exactly as she had written them. Heads nodded politely. Some listened with mild curiosity. Others simply waited for the familiar pattern of royal inheritance to unfold. But the calm lasted only moments. As the document progressed beyond its opening clauses, subtle shifts in the room began to appear. The wording was unexpectedly personal. Instead of the dry legal language many had anticipated, the Queen Mother's will carried a tone that felt reflective, almost evaluative. It spoke not only of possessions, but of values, loyalty, and the quiet responsibilities of royal service. That alone raised a few silent eyebrows around the table. Yet the real turning point came when the advisor reached the section that outlined the primary order of recognition within the document. And there, without hesitation or ambiguity, the first name spoken aloud was Sophie. For a brief moment, the room seemed to freeze. The reaction was not loud or dramatic. Royal gatherings rarely are, but the surprise was unmistakable. Several people exchanged quick glances, as though silently confirming that they had heard correctly. Sophie's position at the top of the will was not subtle. The language surrounding her name was unusually generous, praising her quiet loyalty, her steady discretion, and her unwavering dedication to the values the Queen Mother believed the monarchy must protect. The wording read almost like a tribute, carefully constructed to emphasize the depth of the Queen Mother's trust in her. Sophie herself reportedly remained composed, though those present later suggested the recognition appeared to catch her off guard as much as anyone else. As the reading continued, the atmosphere grew heavier. The order of names that followed did not restore the familiar hierarchy many had expected. Instead, it gradually built a quiet tension that settled deeper with every paragraph. Members of the royal family appeared throughout the document in ways that felt thoughtful but carefully arranged. Meanwhile, Charles listened in stillness, his expression measured and controlled as the advisor progressed further into the will. Those watching closely could sense the moment approaching even before the final lines were spoken, because, as the list neared its conclusion, the structure of the document began revealing a pattern that few had imagined possible. Then came the final section, the last name in the Queen Mother's carefully structured order, Charles. The placement was unmistakable, not overlooked, not ignored, but deliberately positioned at the end of the will. The effect was immediate and profound. No one spoke, no one interrupted the reading. Yet the silence that followed carried an intensity that no one in the room could escape. The meaning of the document was now impossible to ignore. The Queen Mother had made a statement that reached far beyond inheritance. She had reshaped the symbolic order of the family itself. And yet the real shock was not simply where Charles appeared in the will. It was the reasoning the Queen Mother had left behind. Tucked within the will was a handwritten statement from the Queen Mother herself, words that many believe explain the stunning reversal. Far from a simple inheritance decision, the note read like a personal evaluation of the royal family. In it, she spoke about loyalty, quiet strength, and the importance of protecting the crown's integrity, and one passage, in particular, seemed unmistakably directed at Charles. As the legal advisor reached the final portion of the document, there was a moment when many in the room believed the reading had already delivered its greatest surprise. The order of names had been revealed. Sophie placed first, Charles last, That alone had already unsettled the delicate balance of expectation that had existed within the family for decades. But the advisor paused before closing the folder, and then quietly announced that the Queen Mother had left an additional statement written in her own hand. That detail alone changed the atmosphere immediately. Handwritten notes within royal legal documents are rare, and when they appear, they are almost always deliberate. What followed was not legal language. It was something far more personal. The message was calm, reflective, and unmistakably thoughtful. It began not with names but with principles. The Queen Mother wrote about the burden of monarchy, describing it as something heavier than titles or ceremony could ever reveal. She reminded those listening that the crown had survived for generations, not because of privilege, but because of the individuals who protected it with humility and discipline. Again and again, the words returned to one central theme: character. In a particularly striking line, she emphasized that the strength of the monarchy would never be determined by position alone, but by the integrity of the people entrusted with its care. Character, she wrote, must always come before rank. As the statement continued, the tone became quietly specific. Without naming conflicts or accusations, the Queen Mother began reflecting on the individuals within the royal household who had impressed her during her final years. Sophie's name appeared within the message, not as part of the formal will, but as part of a heartfelt acknowledgement. The Queen Mother praised her humility, her patience, and the consistency she had shown while carrying out royal duties without seeking recognition. The wording was strikingly warm, describing Sophie as someone who understood the deeper responsibility of royal service, the quiet work done without applause, the loyalty that does not demand attention, the strength that comes from restraint rather than ambition. For those listening, it became increasingly clear why Sophie had been placed first in the will. Yet the message did not stop there. Slowly, the tone shifted again, becoming more reflective and more cautionary. The Queen Mother wrote about the dangers of ambition when it begins to overshadow duty. She warned that leadership within the monarchy required a delicate balance between vision and humility. Progress, she suggested, must never come at the cost of loyalty to the institution itself. Though the message avoided direct criticism, the implication was impossible to ignore. The words seemed to address a tension that had quietly existed within the royal family for years, a tension between those who sought to shape the monarchy's future and those who believed its greatest strength lay in preserving its traditions. By the time the advisor reached the final lines, the room had fallen into an even deeper silence than before. The Queen Mother concluded her message with a declaration that felt both hopeful and solemn. "The crown," she wrote, "must always be guarded by those who serve it faithfully rather than those who seek to command it." It was a statement that read like both praise and warning. In that moment, many present realized that the will had never been intended as a simple distribution of inheritance. It was something far more symbolic. A final lesson from a woman who had spent her entire life defending the monarchy through its most difficult moments. But while the document explained her reasoning, it did little to calm the storm that was now brewing inside the palace. Those present at the reading say Charles maintained his composure throughout the ceremony. But once the room emptied, the weight of the moment reportedly became impossible to ignore. Being placed last in the Queen Mother's will was more than symbolic, it felt like a deeply personal judgment. And in the hours that followed, palace insiders claimed the future king retreated into private discussions that few would ever hear. When the final pages of the will were read and the formal gathering quietly dissolved, the atmosphere inside the palace shifted almost immediately. What had begun as a solemn royal procedure had turned into something far more unsettling. Members of the royal family left the room, one by one, each carrying the heavy awareness that the Queen Mother's final message had altered the emotional landscape of the family itself. Charles reportedly exited without comment. No visible anger, no outward protest, just silence. Those who witnessed his departure later described it as controlled but unmistakably tense, the kind of silence that carries far more meaning than words ever could. Behind closed palace doors, however, the situation quickly became more complicated. The Queen Mother had not simply placed Charles last in a legal document. She had accompanied that decision with words that seemed to question ambition, leadership, and the delicate balance between power and duty. For Charles, the message could not be ignored. The Queen Mother had been one of the most respected figures within the royal household, someone whose understanding of the monarchy had been shaped through decades of crisis and triumph. Her judgment carried enormous emotional weight, and now that judgment had been preserved permanently inside a document that would inevitably become part of royal history. In the hours following the reading, Charles reportedly withdrew into a series of quiet meetings with a small circle of trusted advisors. These conversations were not public, and their details have never been officially confirmed. Yet palace insiders later suggested that the discussions were intense and deeply reflective. The will was reviewed more than once, with particular attention given to the handwritten statement that had accompanied it. Charles is said to have read those words repeatedly, examining each sentence carefully, searching perhaps for meaning beyond the surface. Was the Queen Mother expressing disappointment, offering a warning, or delivering a final lesson meant to shape the future of the monarchy itself? The emotional complexity of the moment created a difficult dilemma. On one hand, Charles understood the importance of maintaining royal dignity. Public reaction to such a document could easily spiral into controversy, and any visible response from him might ignite speculation about divisions within the royal family. Advisors reportedly urged caution, reminding him that silence would protect both the monarchy and the memory of the Queen Mother. But on the other hand, the personal nature of the message made it impossible to treat the situation as purely ceremonial. Being placed last in the will was not simply a legal position. It was a statement that touched on identity, leadership, and legacy. As the hours passed, that tension reportedly deepened into quiet introspection. Charles had spent much of his life preparing to inherit the crown, shaping his ideas about the monarchy's future and the role he believed he was meant to play. Yet the Queen Mother's words now lingered like an unexpected shadow over that vision. Some insiders later suggested that the moment forced him into a period of deep reflection, one that would remain invisible to the public, but profoundly personal behind palace walls. Pride demanded composure, responsibility demanded restraint. Yet somewhere beneath that royal discipline, the emotional weight of the Queen Mother's final judgment continued to echo. Yet while Charles wrestled with the implications, Sophie suddenly found herself at the center of a legacy she had never expected. For Sophie, the revelation was as shocking as it was overwhelming. She had never sought prominence within the royal hierarchy, preferring a quieter path of service, but the Queen Mother's will had suddenly placed her at the center of a royal earthquake. Overnight, she became the unexpected symbol of the Queen Mother's final judgment. In the immediate aftermath of the reading, those present noticed that Sophie remained unusually still, absorbing the words as they echoed through the room. The recognition had arrived without warning. Unlike others within the royal family, who had spent years preparing for prominence or influence, Sophie had built her reputation quietly, almost deliberately avoiding the spotlight. She had become known inside palace circles for her patience, her calm approach to royal duty, and her instinct for working behind the scenes, rather than commanding attention. That quiet presence was precisely why the moment felt so startling. The Queen Mother had elevated someone who had never appeared to seek elevation at all. When the formal reading ended and the gathering slowly dispersed, Sophie reportedly attempted to treat the moment with humility rather than celebration. Those close to the family later suggested that she downplayed the significance of the document in private conversations, insisting that the Queen Mother's words were meant to honor values rather than individuals. Yet, despite her efforts to soften the moment, the reality was impossible to ignore. The will had transformed her position within the family overnight. What had once been a respectful but modest role had suddenly become something far more symbolic. In the eyes of many observers, Sophie had become the living representation of the Queen Mother's final message. Palace staff began noticing subtle changes in the atmosphere almost immediately. Curiosity spread quietly through royal circles as aides, advisors, and longtime observers tried to interpret what the Queen Mother's decision truly meant. Some believed it reflected a deeply personal bond between the two women that had grown during the Queen Mother's later years. Others suggested it was less about personal affection and more about the qualities Sophie represented: steadiness, restraint, and loyalty without ambition. Whatever the explanation, Sophie herself seemed increasingly aware that the attention surrounding her was not something she could easily avoid. Throughout this period, Edward's support reportedly became an important source of stability. While the palace was quietly absorbing the emotional aftershocks of the will, Edward remained consistently at Sophie's side, offering reassurance during a moment that could easily have become overwhelming. Their partnership had long been known for its quiet strength, and insiders suggested that the couple approached the situation with the same steady mindset that had defined their years of royal service. Rather than allowing the will to create distance within the family, Sophie appeared determined to approach the moment with humility and respect for the Queen Mother's memory. Outside palace walls, however, the reaction was growing. Royal watchers and commentators began asking questions that had never been raised before. What exactly had the Queen Mother seen in Sophie that inspired such extraordinary recognition? Was it loyalty, character, or perhaps something deeper, a belief that Sophie embodied a version of royal duty that the Queen Mother believed the monarchy desperately needed in a changing world? The more people examined the language of the will, the clearer it became that this decision was not merely about inheritance. It had reshaped how many people viewed the royal family's internal balance of character and leadership. As days passed, Sophie seemed to accept the responsibility that had unexpectedly fallen upon her shoulders. Those who knew her best later suggested that she viewed the Queen Mother's words not as praise but as a challenge, a reminder that trust once given must be honoured through continued service. The recognition carried weight, and Sophie appeared determined to carry it with the same quiet dignity that had earned the Queen Mother's admiration in the first place. But as the palace absorbed the shock, one question continued to linger among royal watchers and insiders alike. The Queen Mother's will was not simply a legal document, it was a message, a final statement about loyalty, humility, and the qualities she believed the monarchy needed to survive the future. By placing Sophie first and Charles last, she forced the royal family to confront a difficult possibility. The titles and tradition alone could no longer guarantee trust. In the days following the revelation, discussions about the will spread far beyond the walls of the palace. Royal commentators, historians, and longtime observers of the monarchy began examining the document not as a simple inheritance record, but as a carefully constructed declaration. The Queen Mother had spent nearly an entire century inside the institution of the crown. She had witnessed moments when the monarchy appeared unshakable, and others when it stood dangerously close to losing the confidence of the public. Her understanding of the institution was shaped by survival. Every crisis she had endured reinforced a single lesson. The monarchy could only endure if the individuals representing it embodied a deep sense of responsibility. That perspective now seemed to echo through every line of her final statement. Experts studying the language of the will began pointing to the subtle power of its structure. The decision to elevate Sophie above other senior royals did not simply reflect affection or personal closeness. It appeared to symbolize something deeper. Sophie had become known for her quiet discipline and loyalty to the institution without demanding attention or influence. In many ways, she represented a version of royal duty that the Queen Mother had always admired, service that operated quietly but consistently, far from the distractions of ambition or personal visibility. By placing Sophie first, the Queen Mother may have been sending a message about the qualities she believed should guide the monarchy's future. At the same time, the placement of Charles at the end of the document raised uncomfortable questions about leadership and perception within the royal family. Charles had spent decades shaping ideas about the monarchy's role in a changing world, advocating for modern perspectives and broader engagement with global issues. Yet the Queen Mother's words suggested that she measured leadership through a different lens. Her statement emphasized humility, loyalty, and the quiet preservation of tradition. For some observers, the contrast between these philosophies created a deeper interpretation of the will. It was not a rejection of Charles, but perhaps a core. I attempt to remind the next generation that progress must always remain anchored to the values that allowed the monarchy to endure in the first place. The symbolic power of the will soon became impossible to ignore. What had once appeared to be a personal document now carried the weight of a historical statement. The Queen Mother had effectively used her final words to challenge assumptions about authority within the royal family. Titles, lineage, and expectation had long shaped the monarchy's hierarchy. But through the structure of her will, She appeared to be arguing that something more important existed beneath those traditions: character, consistency, loyalty without ambition. These were the qualities she had chosen to highlight, and the message resonated far beyond the immediate shock of the document's order. For the royal family, the implications were complex. Some viewed the will as a gentle but unmistakable lesson left by a woman who had devoted her life to protecting the institution. Others interpreted it as a final act of guidance, an attempt to influence how the monarchy would define leadership in the years to come. Regardless of interpretation, the Queen Mother's decision had already accomplished something extraordinary. It had forced the royal family, and those who watched them closely, to reconsider the meaning of service within a modern monarchy. And as the monarchy continues to move forward, the Queen Mother's final decision still casts a long shadow over the family she left behind. Years may pass, and royal headlines may change, but the moment the Queen Mother's will was opened remains unforgettable. It was not merely a reading of inheritance, it was a revelation that challenged expectations and forced the royal family to reflect on its own values. Because in one carefully written document, the Queen Mother delivered a final message that still echoes through the corridors of the palace. In the weeks and months that followed, the impact of that moment slowly settled into the fabric of the royal family. What had initially seemed like a startling surprise gradually revealed itself as something deeper, a turning point that subtly reshaped how many inside the palace viewed loyalty, leadership, and responsibility. The Queen Mother had not simply rearranged names within a legal document. She had left behind a challenge, a question that lingered long after the reading ended. For a family built upon centuries of tradition, the idea that character might outweigh rank carried enormous emotional weight. Conversations inside royal circles became more reflective, more cautious, as individuals quietly considered what the Queen Mother's final judgment truly meant. Sophie, perhaps more than anyone, understood the responsibility embedded in that message. Being placed first in the Queen Mother's will had never been something she sought, and it certainly was not a role she celebrated publicly. Instead, she approached the recognition with the same quiet steadiness that had defined her path within the royal household for years. Those who observed her closely noted that she seemed even more committed to her duties after the will became known. It was as though she understood that the Queen Mother's trust was not a reward but a responsibility and expectation that the values described in the handwritten note would continue to live through her actions. In many ways, Sophie became a living reflection of the very qualities the Queen Mother had praised: humility, patience, and service without the need for recognition. For Charles, the aftermath unfolded in a very different way. The Queen Mother's final message had undoubtedly carried emotional weight, yet it did not halt his path forward. If anything, it seemed to deepen his determination to prove that leadership could still evolve while honoring tradition. Royal observers began noticing a quiet resilience in his approach during the months that followed. Rather than responding publicly to the symbolism of the will, he chose to continue fulfilling his responsibilities with composure and restraint. In doing so, he demonstrated the discipline expected of someone preparing to carry the crown. The Queen Mother's words may have introduced tension, but they also served as a reminder that leadership is often defined not by how one is judged, but by how one responds to that judgment. Beyond the palace walls, public fascination with the will continued to grow. Historians and commentators examined every detail of the document, searching for clues about the Queen Mother's deeper intentions. Some believed the will represented a quiet warning to future generations of royals, a reminder that the monarchy survives only when its members embody the values it claims to represent. Others viewed it as an act of foresight from a woman who had spent nearly an entire lifetime defending the crown through its most difficult moments. Whatever interpretation people chose, the document carried a rare symbolic power. It demonstrated that influence within the monarchy did not end with death. In fact, sometimes it only grew stronger, and that may be the most extraordinary part of the Queen Mother's final act. Even after her passing, she managed to guide the conversation surrounding the monarchy's future. She reminded the royal family that power, prestige, and tradition are only part of the story. The rest depends on character, on the quiet strength of individuals who understand that service to the crown must always come before personal ambition. That lesson now lives quietly within the pages of her will, continuing to shape how the royal family sees itself and how the world interprets her, he meaning of royal duty. And perhaps that was the Queen Mother's true brilliance, ensuring that even after her passing, the monarchy would be forced to confront the very question she left behind: who truly deserves to stand first? Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.